Chapter 219, Craftsman 3. Everyone was baffled by Mok Jae-un's sudden disappearance. Of course, Mok Jae-un's group, consisting of the advance and rear teams, were amazed in a different sense, knowing that he had utilized an incredibly fast lightness skill. Then Ganyong, the leader of the advance team, spoke softly to Mong Muyak and Seop Chun from the rear team with a troubled expression. Shouldn't we have stopped young Master Mok? Stop him? How could we have done that? He had vanished before they could even say anything. How were they supposed to stop him? If there's friction with the embroidered uniform guards now that the mask production has already gone awry, it could further disrupt our plan. Ganyong thought the human skin mask production was already a lost cause since the master's arms had been severed. If they clashed with the embroidered uniform guard under such circumstances, it could make infiltrating the imperial palace even more difficult. At his words, Seop Chun spoke as if telling him not to worry. Just wait and see. Our lord is not someone who lacks judgment. And as for the mask production, Seop Chun hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. He was about to say that if their lord, Mok Jae-un, could find the master's severed hands, he could reattach them with his mysterious medical techniques, but he wasn't sure if they would easily believe it. After all, it was hard to believe that severed arms could be reattached. Just then someone suddenly rushed into the room, panting heavily. Gasp. It's a big problem. Brother Mo. The hairy man recognized him and called him Brother Mo. Brother Mo then spoke to the slaughterhouse workers with a tearful voice, as if apologizing. Miss Song-ah has been arrested by the embroidered uniform guard for obstructing official duties. What? Obstructing official duties? No, Mr. Mo, you just watched it happen? Shocked by the sudden news, the slaughterhouse workers were perplexed and outraged. At that moment, these damn bastards. The hairy man with an enraged face pulled out a slaughter knife hanging on the room's wall. He seemed ready to rush outside at any moment. Just then someone scolded him. Stop right there. The hairy man who was about to run out frowned and stopped in his tracks. The one who stopped him was none other than the master. The master spoke with difficulty as he struggled to get up. Haha. What do you think you can accomplish by getting involved? But young Miss Song, do you want to make matters worse? The master who had reprimanded him, then looked at Seop Chun and his group and spoke. Haha. You're martial artists, right? At his words, Ganyong, the leader of the advance team, nodded and replied. That's correct. The master. You're bleeding heavily, so don't strain yourself and sit down for now. Thud. Before he could finish his sentence, the master knelt on the floor. Master. Why are you? The slaughterhouse workers became restless at his action. Nevertheless, the master ignored them and said what he wanted to say. Haha. Fine. But I have a request for you. A request. Please help us. Ganyong was troubled by his plea. It was already a difficult situation with Mok Jae-un acting on his own, and if they also clashed with the embroidered uniform guard, it could seriously hinder their mission. Master, I understand your desire to save your daughter, but... Haha. That child, cough cough, is not my daughter. What? Didn't everyone refer to her as the young miss? If so, she should be the master's daughter, but what does he mean by that? Just then the hairy man who had been gripping the handle of the slaughter knife also knelt on the floor like the master. Please help us. Brother Song. Surprised by his sudden action, the slaughterhouse workers tried to dissuade him. At that moment the demon-subduing monk Jajiamjong alternately glanced at the master and the hairy man called Brother Song, then burst into laughter. Ha! Now I get it. Clang. The embroidered uniform guard with droopy eyebrows couldn't hide his bewilderment. This guy is an expert. The embroidered uniform guard with droopy eyebrows was a 100-man commander of the senior 6th rank, an expert at the entry stage of the peak realm. If someone could block his sword strike infused with his 7-star martial power with a mere finger, it meant that the martial prowess of this unknown expert with a covered face far surpassed his own. With an expert of this level, the 4 of us need to attack together, or the 1,000-man commander needs to step in. Pat. Realizing he couldn't handle it alone, the embroidered uniform guard with droopy eyebrows hastily distanced himself and raised one hand behind his back, sending a hand signal to the other embroidered uniform guards for help, and spoke. Who are you to interfere with our embroidered uniform guards' affairs? He deliberately emphasized their identity as the embroidered uniform guard. Among the people of the Central Plains, there was no one who didn't know that the embroidered uniform guard were the emperor's personal guards. He did so to instill a sense of caution in his opponent. No matter how skilled in martial arts, he wanted to convey how dangerous it was to provoke them. In response to his words, the person with the covered face, No Mok Jeongeun, whose face was covered with a black cloth, chuckled and said, "Oh, so you're from the embroidered uniform guard." The embroidered uniform guard frowned at Mok Jeongeun's tone, as if he was pretending not to know. Was he doing this on purpose? It made no sense for him to not know they were from the embroidered uniform guard after seeing their golden belts and flying fish robes. The embroidered uniform guard then spoke. "If you truly didn't know, stop right here and back off. Then we won't question your circumstances or accuse you of any crimes." Before he could finish his sentence, swish, Mok Jeongeun instantly closed the distance, appearing right in front of him. Gasp. Startled, he swung his sword behind him, trying to propel his body backward, but Mok Jeongeun struck the acupuncture points of the embroidered uniform guard with droopy eyebrows at lightning speed. Ta-ta-ta-ta-tack. The embroidered uniform guard, whose acupuncture points had been struck, closed his eyes and immediately fell unconscious. Thud. Witnessing this, the other embroidered uniform guards, who had dismounted from their horses to help the embroidered uniform guard with droopy eyebrows and were stealthily approaching, couldn't hide their bewilderment. One of them hurriedly tried to shout towards the carriage. "Come, man." Mok Jeongeun then grabbed the neck of the embroidered uniform guard with droopy eyebrows as if he would break it and wiggled his index finger from side to side at the embroidered uniform guards. It was clear to anyone that if they shouted, he would snap their comrade's neck. He's taking a hostage? The embroidered uniform guards, whose comrade had been taken hostage, stopped shouting and hesitated, unsure of what to do. At that moment, Mok Jeongeun's figure dispersed like smoke. Swish. Body displacement technique? Body displacement technique. It is a phenomenon where one moves so fast that their figure appears as an afterimage. The startled embroidered uniform guards tried to turn their backs to each other and assume a defensive stance. However, before they could even turn around, one of them, the embroidered uniform guard with a beard, was struck on the chin. Bam. Ugh. His head jerked upward and then his eyes rolled back as he collapsed to the ground. Thud. And no way. With another comrade taken down in an instant, the remaining two embroidered uniform guards, startled, pressed their backs tightly against each other and frantically darted their eyes in all directions with extreme tension. However, not even Mok Jeongeun's shadow entered their sight. Their complexions gradually darkened under the suffocating tension. The name of the woman with thick eyebrows, freckles and braided hair was Songa. She was the daughter of Hong Bong Meat's master and also the head maid in charge of the slaughterhouse's inner workings. Songa, whose mouth was gagged with a thick cloth, glared at the masked embroidered uniform guard sitting with his arms crossed in front of her. She had desperately chased after the embroidered uniform guards to demand her father's severed hands, but now she found herself bound and confined inside the carriage. The masked embroidered uniform guard spoke to her. "Have you calmed down a bit?" It was a heavy baritone voice. Judging by his voice, he seemed like someone who wouldn't speak much. Songa stared intently at the masked embroidered uniform guard for a moment, then finally nodded. The masked embroidered uniform guard then removed the cloth that had been gagging her mouth. Ha! She let out rough breaths as if she had been suffocating. After catching her breath, she glared at the masked embroidered uniform guard again and spoke. "Is the great embroidered uniform guard not only taking my father's hands but now kidnapping me as well? Where are you trying to take me?" While most women would have been frightened after being arrested by the embroidered uniform guard, she boldly confronted him. The masked embroidered uniform guard, who had been staring at her, opened his mouth. "Watch your words. You were the one who followed the procession and caused a commotion." "A commotion? Is it a commotion to try and stop you from taking my father's hands like some trophy after severing them, even though he accepted the request from your esteemed superior? Be quiet and lower your voice." "I won't lower it. Do you want to be gagged again? Go ahead and do it. I'll continue causing that so-called commotion until you return my father's hands." Kaya! Tatatap. As Songa tried to scream, the masked embroidered uniform guard pressed her mute acupuncture point. He then sighed and shook his head. She was not just bold but incredibly foolish. MMPH. Even with her mute acupuncture point pressed, she struggled with all her might to make a sound. The masked embroidered uniform guard watching her spoke. You're persistent. MMPH. But don't overdo it. MMPH. You came to retrieve your father's severed hands? Your filial piety seems admirable, but it's excessive. At his words, Songa, who had been putting in effort to make a sound, stopped and glared at the masked embroidered uniform guard. The masked embroidered uniform guard then picked up a leather pouch from the floor and held it up to Songa. He then pushed it towards her and said, If you had made a reasonable commotion and left, it would have looked plausible, but why did you go to such lengths to retrieve this? Strictly speaking, these aren't even your master's hands, are they? At those words, Songa's eyes trembled slightly. Seeing her somewhat subdued attitude, the masked embroidered uniform guard released the mute acupuncture point that had been blocked. Ta-ta-ta-ta-tack. The masked embroidered uniform guard then said to Songa, I've enclosed this space with true chi, blocking the sound between the inside and outside of the carriage. Shouting won't do any good, so confess the truth. At his words, Songa tightly shut her mouth. The masked embroidered uniform guard shook his head and spoke. I see. It would be troublesome for you to reveal the truth here. But you've already been caught. What have you caught? In response to her question, the masked embroidered uniform guard set the leather pouch on the floor and replied. These aren't the real master's hands, are they? What are you talking about? You severed my father's hands and now claim they're not the real master's hands. For the hands of someone who creates human skin masks, the distribution of calluses seemed consistent. What does that mean? From what I know, the process of creating human skin masks is more difficult than one might think, and the craftsman's hands are unlikely to remain intact due to the glue and various chemicals used. However, the owner of these hands is no different from someone who has only done slaughter work their entire life. At these words, Songa's expression hardened even more. The masked embroidered uniform guard, further convinced by her reaction, continued. Perhaps the master whose hands were severed is a fake. I didn't think you would easily expose the real craftsman to others. Speechless at the masked embroidered uniform guard's piercing speculation, Songa, who had been keeping her mouth shut, finally swallowed her saliva and spoke. No. That person is really... If I were to turn the carriage around right now, go back to Hong Bong Meat and raid the place, would you confess the truth? Grip. At his threat, which wasn't really a threat, she bit her lip tightly. She wanted to deceive him, but he was not someone she could deceive. In the end, she confessed the truth. You're right. That person is not the real master. Finally, we're getting somewhere. At those words, Songa snorted and spoke with a sneer. Then, of course, you must have also figured out that I'm not his real daughter. Of course, you're not his daughter, but you're not a fake either. What? Your hands. The masked embroidered uniform guard pointed to her hands with a nod. The skin on her palms was peeled, and calluses were so prevalent that it was difficult to find a properly intact area. Because of this, the masked embroidered uniform guard was convinced that she was the real craftsman's daughter. Damn it! Realizing that she could no longer deceive him, Songa could only grit her teeth and glare at him, unable to do anything else. So what are you going to do with me? Will you use me as a hostage to find the real one? Is that what you wish for? Then I'll bite my tongue and die right here. Willing to give up your life for your father? The masked embroidered uniform guard pondered her words, then chuckled and spoke. If I truly intended to use you as a hostage, do you think there would be a reason for us to have this conversation? What do you mean by that? He asked, puzzled. The masked embroidered uniform guard lowered his voice cautiously, even though he had said he blocked the sound between the inside and outside of the carriage, and spoke. I had no choice but to sever the fake master's wrists due to orders, but I wouldn't have done so if he were the real one. What? I'm saying I had no intention of making an enemy of your father, the real craftsman. At the masked embroidered uniform guard's words, she frowned. Was he testing her? She couldn't adapt to his suddenly changed attitude. Do you think I'll believe your words? Of course you won't believe me. But I have my circumstances where I have no choice but to obey someone's orders. Of course I won't ask you to understand this. Even if you have such circumstances, I can't trust you. I know. But if it were a lie, having this conversation would be meaningless, as I said before. At these words, Songa became increasingly confused. Was this man's true intention what he was showing now? To her, who couldn't escape her doubts, the masked, embroidered uniform guard said, "I will release you soon." "What? You're releasing me?" "That's right." "Why? Didn't I say I have no intention of making an enemy of you or your father, the craftsman?" "I won't force you to trust me. Once I release you, take your real father and leave Gabong within 4 days. It may not be immediate, but if someone has a keen eye, they will eventually notice these hands. However, I will buy you time for 4 days." Why are you trying to help us?" Song asked, not understanding his intention to show her goodwill. The masked, embroidered uniform guard replied in a low voice. "It's not for nothing. I also need help." "Help?" "Yes. Help could it be? Bring me a human skin mask." "A human skin mask?" "That's right." "What kind of?" "It's simple. Just recreate the same human skin mask that was requested before." At his request, Song asked, puzzled. "Why are you asking me to make the human skin mask again?" "I have no obligation to tell you that. It's a mutually beneficial condition, so just make the same human skin mask." "Can you?" "Flinch." At that moment, the masked, embroidered uniform guard stopped mid-sentence. "What's wrong?" "The carriage has stopped." He had blocked the sound between the inside and outside of the carriage with true qi, so he couldn't hear the outside. But that didn't mean he couldn't feel the vibrations of the carriage. He hadn't paid attention while conversing, but the carriage seemed to have been stopped for quite a while. Swish. The masked, embroidered uniform guard released his true qi, opened the carriage door and stepped outside. Hover. All the officials and 4 embroidered uniform guards outside were lying unconscious. Although he had blocked the sound, it hadn't been that long. Yet this had happened in such a short time? Sensing that something was amiss, the masked, embroidered uniform guard unhesitatingly tried to press the acupuncture points below his ears with his thumbs. But then a voice came from behind him. "I was bored waiting. So, have you finished your secret conversation?" An expert. Even though he had sealed his chi points, the fact that someone had approached him from behind without any presence meant they were at least at the transcendent realm. The masked, embroidered uniform guard, who had his thumbs on the acupuncture points, spoke without losing his composure. "Who are you?" In response to his question, a completely irrelevant answer flowed from behind. "Which one would be better?" "What? Would it be better to have the embroidered uniform guard's 1,000-man commander kill all his subordinates and officials and run away? Or would it be better to skin your faces and make use of them?" Chapter 220 Mixed-Blooded 1. Would it be better to have the embroidered uniform guard's 1,000-man commander kill all his subordinates and officials and run away? Or would it be better to skin your faces and make use of them? Flinch. The blue eyes behind the mask trembled at the casually spoken, spine-chilling suggestion full of malice. Just who was this person? Who was he to attack them and make such threatening remarks? The masked, embroidered uniform guard, his mind in turmoil, hesitated, unsure of what to do. Since his back had been taken, there was a high chance he would be struck before he could press the pressure points. Right at that moment. Creak. Is something happening outside? As the carriage door opened, Songa, the craftsman's real daughter, appeared. Songa, seeing Mok Jung-un standing behind the masked, embroidered uniform guard with his face covered, spoke in confusion. Who are you?" I was wondering who he was talking to, but it turns out to be a young lady. Judging by your attire and scent, you seem to be related to Hong Bong Meat Slaughterhouse, not the embroidered uniform guard. There it is. Mok Jung-un noticed the leather pouch inside the open carriage. At that very moment, the masked, embroidered uniform guard quickly pressed his pressure points. Tatatap. Mok Jung-un, instantly recognizing from the sound that he had taken advantage of the moment his head was turned, tried to strike the back of the embroidered uniform guard's neck. Right then. Swish. Mok Jung-un's hand grazed through the air. The faint wind felt at his fingertips. Along with it, the masked, embroidered uniform guard disappeared. Then a presence was felt behind him. Swish. A sharp, killing intent was felt at his neck. At this, Mok Jung-un spoke. "Your lightness skill is remarkably fast." He meant it sincerely. Since eldest young master Na Yul Riang, this was the first time someone had surpassed his movement with a lightness skill. The masked embroidered uniform guard, who had somehow appeared behind him, pressed the blade harder against Mok Jae-un's neck and spoke. You bastard. What is your identity? I don't really have an identity to speak of. It seems you want to play word games, but do you wish to die like this? Press. The embroidered uniform guard pressed Mok Jae-un's neck with the blade. No matter how sharp a blade was, it needed to be pressed and dragged to cut. Thus the blade only pressed against the flesh. The masked embroidered uniform guard spoke to Mok Jae-un in a menacing voice. If I slice like this, your body and head will be separated. So it's best for you to speak truthfully. You're scaring me by saying that. Mok Jae-un spoke nonchalantly, shrugging his shoulders. The masked embroidered uniform guard frowned at Mok Jae-un's composed attitude. Even in a life-threatening situation he showed no fear at all. Just who the hell was this guy? Even with the chi point sealed, the chi sensed from him is at the pinnacle stage of peak realm. Naturally, with this level of skill, it was more than enough to subdue the 4 embroidered uniform guards of the 100-men commander rank and the officials. However, the overwhelming presence he had felt from behind earlier surpassed this. Was he mistaken? Did I do something unnecessary? He had unsealed the chi points he had kept sealed due to that discomfort. But if he was simply at the pinnacle stage of peak realm, there was no need to unseal the hidden martial prowess. Just then Song A's voice was heard. Is he someone sent by the master? The master. At her words, the masked embroidered uniform guard suddenly recalled what Mok Jae-un had said. Judging by your attire and scent, you seem to be related to Hong Bong Meat Slaughterhouse, not the embroidered uniform guard. There it is. He had said those words after seeing the leather pouch inside the carriage. That meant, as she said, he might have been sent by the master of Hong Bong Meat. If he was the renowned craftsman known for creating hidden human skin masks, he would certainly have connections with skilled martial artists. The masked embroidered uniform guard pressed the blade harder and spoke. Press. Is it true that you were sent by Hong Bong Meat? To his question Mok Jae-un replied. Since we've also found the leather pouch, going with the latter option doesn't seem bad. What? I thought skinning faces and making use of them wouldn't be bad either. What are you saying? Swish. At that moment, Mok Jae-un moved his neck in the opposite direction of where the blade was touching. At the same time he quickly grabbed the embroidered uniform guard's blade. This guy. The embroidered uniform guard tried to pull the blade out of Mok Jae-un's hand. However. Clang. Before he could pull the blade out, the sword body held in Mok Jae-un's hand broke. The embroidered uniform guard couldn't help but be inwardly surprised. It wasn't reinforced with strong chi, but his sword was called a precious sword, and with the killing intent infused, it couldn't be broken by ordinary strength. Yet if he possessed the martial power to break it, indeed that discomfort was... Swish. Just then Mok Jae-un's figure blurred, and a kick from him came towards the embroidered uniform guard's chin. The masked embroidered uniform guard focused strength on the Yangchen acupoints on both his feet and stomped the ground. Pabuk. Mok Jae-un's kick sliced through the air. Once again the wind was felt where it grazed and the masked embroidered uniform guard's figure disappeared. He possessed an astonishingly fast lightness skill. At that moment Mok Jae-un's eyes moved swiftly left and right. Swish. Mok Jae-un's figure also disappeared. He had utilized the high-speed movement lightness skill, Myongyeon Suiolbo. The moment he used Myongyeon Suiolbo, the masked embroidered uniform guard who had disappeared was seen moving left and right trying to take his back. However, it wasn't only Mok Jae-un who noticed this. This guy. The masked embroidered uniform guard had never seen anyone enter the same realm as him when using lightness skills, except for his master. It was a phenomenon where the axis became misaligned with others during high-speed movement. It was similar to the phenomenon of everything appearing to stop when looking to the side while riding a horse. Yet someone other than himself had entered that realm. How? The masked embroidered uniform guard couldn't hide his surprise. At that instant Mok Jae-un followed him closely and thrust his sword finger towards his chest. The masked embroidered uniform guard tilted his body to the side and executed a fist technique towards Mok Jae-un's face. Terrain fist technique, sixth stance, rock-shattering explosive fist. A fist aura erupted from the embroidered uniform guard's fist. Since they were both moving at high speed and he had thrust his sword finger, there was no way to dodge. Mok Jeong-un blocked the fist aura, targeting his face with his left hand. Bang. Hover. Rock-shattering explosive fist doesn't end here. 5 consecutive fist auras followed, capable of shattering even rocks. Pushed back by the fist auras that seemed to penetrate his palm, Mok Jeong-un's figure was pushed backward. Bang. 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 Slide. Bang. At the 4th fist aura, Mok Jeong-un's hand was forced upward. As if seizing the opportunity, the embroidered uniform guard launched the final fist aura towards Mok Jeong-un's chin. Bam! Mok Jeong-un's head jerked upward as his chin was struck. At that instant, the masked embroidered uniform guard pulled both his hands back to his waist and then sent them flying towards Mok Jeong-un's chest with lightning speed. Cloud sending palm technique, 4th stance, double cloud palms. Bang! Ripples appeared on the fabric covering Mok Jeong-un's chest area as he was hit by the double palms, and his figure was sent flying backward. However, the place he was sent flying towards was... oh no! The carriage. Song-a, the real daughter of the Hongbong meat craftsman, was standing there. Realizing this, the masked embroidered uniform guard concentrated all his chi to the Yongchen acupoints and stomped the ground twice. Papak. At that moment his figure became even faster than before. It seemed as if an afterimage was created with each movement, making it appear as if there were 2 of him. Swoosh. The masked embroidered uniform guard, moving at a speed similar to Mok Jeong-un, who was sent flying after being hit by the double palms, scooped up Song-a with one arm at the last moment. Ah! The masked embroidered uniform guard, having scooped up Song-a, propelled his body backward. At the same time, Mok Jeong-un's body collided with the carriage. Crash. The carriage that Mok Jeong-un collided with shattered into pieces. Seeing the carriage crumble and break into fragments, the masked embroidered uniform guard couldn't hide his troubled expression. He had prioritized saving Song-a since she was important, but the leather pouch containing the severed hands of the fake master was inside the carriage. Will it be all right? As he was worrying, Song-a spoke in a startled voice. What on earth is going on? To her, who had not cultivated martial arts, the 2 of them suddenly disappeared from her sight. Then the masked embroidered uniform guard abruptly appeared and pulled her, and the carriage suddenly shattered into pieces. She was trembling, so shocked by the situation, and the masked embroidered uniform guard spoke to her. It's nothing. But is that person really the one sent by your father? I don't know. I've never seen him before. Are you sure? No. How would I know someone who even has their face covered? That's true. But if he's really the one sent by my father, why were you fighting? You said you would let me go. To her question, the masked embroidered uniform guard let out a faint sigh and spoke. He was a dangerous individual. Dangerous? If my father sent him, he would have sent him to save me. It didn't seem like he was simply trying to save you. What do you mean by that? Not just trying to save me. I'm not sure if he was trying to provoke me or if he was sincere, but it seemed like he was targeting everyone here. The masked embroidered uniform guard had felt endless malice in Mok Jeong-un's every word. At that, Song-a spoke. If my father really sent him, that can't be. What you're saying is that he was trying to kill all of you while saving me to eliminate the evidence, but if that were the case, it would only make matters bigger if left unchecked. At the voice coming from the direction of the carriage, Song-a and the masked embroidered uniform guard simultaneously turned their gazes there. Mok Jeong-un was standing in front of the carriage, casually holding something. It was the leather pouch containing the severed hands of the fake master. What in the world? The masked embroidered uniform guard's eyes trembled. That was because Mok Jeong-un's appearance was too unscathed. He was certain he had struck Mok Jeong-un's chin with the rock-shattering explosive fist and consecutively landed the double cloud palms on his chest, which should have damaged his heart. If he had been hit in the brain and heart, he couldn't possibly be this unharmed. As he was bewildered, Song-a stepped forward and spoke. Are you really the one sent by the master? No, my father? Father? Yes. I'm Song-a, the daughter of Hongbong meat's master. Is that so? If you're really the one sent by my father, please stop fighting. This person was trying to let me go. At her words, Mok Jeong-un tilted his head and spoke. Trying to let you go? Yes. We made a deal. So you can stop fighting now. Oh. Is that so? Yes. This time, Songa turned her head and spoke to the masked embroidered uniform guard. I think he really is the one sent by my father. So I'll keep my promise, so please, esteemed embroidered uniform guard, cover up this incident. He didn't know anything. At her words, the masked embroidered uniform guard looked around. The officials and the 100-men commander were all lying unconscious, but no one was dead. After contemplating for a moment, he spoke. All right. I'll handle this matter on my end. But hand over the leather pouch. It will be difficult to cover up this incident without it. At his words, Songa frowned but then spoke to Mok Jae-eun. It seems you'll have to return the leather pouch. Mok Jae-eun chuckled at her words. Puzzled by his attitude, Songa spoke. If you don't return it, he won't be able to cover up the incident. So, I'm afraid that's not possible. At his words, Songa spoke as if it were absurd. What are you saying? He's saying the incident could escalate if you don't return it. I'm sorry, but I didn't come here on your father's request. I came here of my own accord. What? I need to take this to reattach your father's severed hands. At Mok Jae-eun's words, she furrowed her brows. What on earth was he talking about? She couldn't understand what he meant by reattaching severed hands. Just then, swish. Mok Jae-eun's figure disappeared from sight. At that moment, the masked embroidered uniform guard hurriedly pulled Songa. Although invisible to her eyes, Mok Jae-eun had used high-speed movement to try and strike her pressure points to make her fall asleep. The masked embroidered uniform guard, having pulled Songa to avoid this, stomped his feet twice. Papak. Swish. Then his figure dispersed like an afterimage and split into two. One of the split figures was pulling Songa further back, while the other launched a fist technique towards Mok Jae-eun. Papapapapak. Terrain fist technique. Third stance, shadowless shattering fist. His fists created numerous fist shadows, overwhelming Mok Jae-eun. Right at that moment, Mok Jae-eun stomped the ground twice. Papak. Then an unbelievable event occurred. Mok Jae-eun's figure created afterimages and split into two. One figure easily blocked the shadowless shattering fist with one hand, while the other figure reached out towards the masked embroidered uniform guard who was pulling Songa. Seeing this, the masked embroidered uniform guard couldn't hide his shock. This wasn't the lightness skill that fellow had been using, but his own unique lightness skill. How could something like this happen? As he was startled, Mok Jae-eun, who had somehow closed the distance right in front of him, tried to snatch Songa away using the golden silk hand technique. Left with no choice, the masked embroidered uniform guard pushed her to the side. He then tried to block Mok Jae-eun's golden silk hand with the cloud-sending palm technique's palm strike. But, papak. Before he could even execute the palm strike, Mok Jae-eun lightly struck down his hand with a bizarre technique, and simultaneously thrust his sword finger towards his face with the other hand. Different stances with both hands? As he executed different techniques simultaneously, even the masked embroidered uniform guard had no way to deal with it. Tilting his head back, he propelled his body backward. Having propelled his body and instantly retreated about 10 steps, the masked embroidered uniform guard came to a stop. At the moment he thought he had narrowly dodged the sword finger. Crack. Cracks appeared on his mask and it began to split apart. He had failed to evade the sharp killing intent that flowed from the sword finger. No. The startled masked embroidered uniform guard hurriedly grabbed it. More than anything else, he didn't want anyone to see his face behind the mask. However, as the mask split apart left and right, he couldn't hold it all together. Clatter. The cracked parts of the mask fell off here and there, revealing the left side of his face. Along with his blue eyes, he had a high nose bridge and a rather exotic-looking face. The embroidered uniform guard's 1,000-men commander, believing that he had exposed this to others, distorted his expression as if feeling ashamed and covered his face with his hand. Chapter 221, Mixed-Blooded 2. Songa, the real daughter of the Hongbong meat craftsman, who had fallen over after being pushed by the masked embroidered uniform guards, widened her eyes. It was because of the face that was revealed when the mask cracked. Although it was only half from the blue eyes to the high nose bridge and that exotic face, anyone could see that he resembled a person from the western regions rather than the central plains. "My lord." Without realizing it, she called out to the masked embroidered uniform guards. No, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard. The man, covering his face with his hand, scolded her. Don't look at me. Instantly, she lowered her head without realizing it. Even if he had just shouted, she would have been startled. But when an expert of that level yelled with killing intent, it was only natural for an ordinary person like her to feel her heart skip a beat. Nash. However, even at her reaction, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard became even more agitated. He was extremely wary of his face being exposed. Blue eyes. Why is a bastard who should be in the western regions here? Filthy foreigner's child. These were the words he had heard even before he could walk. The countless acts of discrimination he had faced simply for being different had tormented him and made him emotionally closed off. If he hadn't met his master, his life might have taken a turn for the worst. However, he still didn't want to show his face to anyone. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, covering the exposed area with his hand, glared at Mok Jae-young, who had shattered his mask like this. But then, why are you so embarrassed? What? There's no particular flaw on your face, so why are you covering it like that? At these words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's expression distorted terribly. Was this guy mocking him now? He was already sensitive about his face being exposed and now his blood was boiling. At least this bastard. Papak. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard stomped the ground twice. Along with that, his figure dispersed like an afterimage, split into two and simultaneously charged toward Mok Jae-young. The two split figures executed stances simultaneously. Cloud-sending palm technique, sixth stance, secret softness rush. Terrain fist technique, fourth stance, rock-shattering form. The left figure charged softly at an angle that was difficult to gauge the distance, while the right figure unleashed a heavy, destructive fist technique. Soft palm and heavy fist? Papak. In response, Mok Jae-young also stomped the ground twice. Then, just like the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, his figure split into two along with afterimages. Seeing this, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's eyes sharpened. It's certain. It was absurd. He had a feeling it might be the case, but this fellow was utilizing the same footwork of the lightness skill as him. Just what was going on? In the first place, the footwork of a lightness skill wasn't something that could be imitated simply by watching. One needed to know the exact breathing technique and hand seals to execute it. However, the important thing now wasn't that. I need to stay calm. Even if this fellow had superficially imitated his lightness skill, he thought he wouldn't be able to fathom its depth. Thus, the two figures split from the two individuals clashed. Papapapapak. The afterimages intertwined and a bizarre confrontation unfolded. Certainly, the movements of the two afterimages performed by the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, who could be considered the original, were incomparably more natural. However, Mok Jae-young countered this by executing different stances with both hands. Again, executing different stances with both hands was even more troublesome to deal with than the split body technique. That was because, although he didn't know how it was possible, the stances executed independently by both hands retained their full power. Papapapak. Kook. As a result, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard had no choice but to be pushed back. He couldn't fathom this fellow's true identity. From the moment he split his figure into two using the lightness skill, it was equivalent to splitting his thoughts into two, but on top of that he executed different stances with both hands. He's a monster. Excluding his master and those two in the Imperial Palace, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard was confident that no one within Gaebong could match him in pure martial arts. However, he had never imagined that he would be pushed back in a stance battle. Papapapapak. In the end, unable to withstand the technique battle, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard was the first to distance himself. Pat. Of course, Mok Jae-young wouldn't let him go. He tried to follow immediately. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, glaring at Mok Jae-young, had a solemn look in his eyes. At this rate, he couldn't defeat this person. In that case, he had to unleash his secret technique, which could be considered his full power. You who haven't fully mastered the essence of this martial art can only handle up to the second class at best. However, if you truly encounter an unexpected situation, I will pass on the secret technique so that you can execute the fourth class for a single stance. This was his ultimate secret technique that he had learned from his master. He was confident that even this monstrous fellow wouldn't be able to defend against it. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, who was propelling his body backward to create distance, placed his foot on the ground and bent his knee. Along with that, bang! He fiercely kicked the ground. Swoosh. A whirlwind and fierce wind surged and a bizarre event occurred. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's figure split into four. Mok Jae-un's eyes sparkled with interest. He thought splitting afterimages into two was the limit, but he never expected it to split into four. However, the breathing method was completely different from before, and this wasn't a stance that could be replicated instantly just by watching. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, split into four, charged toward Mok Jae-un. Hap. Stances executed with a strong shout. Pa-pa-pa-pa-pa-pa-pa. They consisted of four entirely different schools of martial arts: fist, palm, leg, and claw. However, these martial arts were linked in an extremely clever manner. Therefore, their power was on a different level compared to when the afterimages were split into two. The momentum was truly like a storm. Pat. Mok Jae-un, who had been following the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, distanced himself by propelling his body backward. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard shouted at him. "Do you think you can dodge it? Papa-papa-pack." If a monstrous fellow like him retreated, it meant he couldn't find a way to break through his secret technique. He couldn't miss this golden opportunity. Right at that moment. If it's at this level, even if it's not fully complete, it's worth testing out. Srung. Mok Jae-un drew the evil commandment sword from the scabbard on his back. The evil commandment sword, revealed from its scabbard, emitted a strong killing intent along with its sword aura. It's not an ordinary sword. Although it was a precious sword, it felt somewhat ominous. However, the sword wasn't the issue. The moment Mok Jae-un held the sword and assumed a stance, the atmosphere changed. As if a volcano about to erupt, a sense of discomfort greatly intensified. What is it? The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard was confident of his victory from the moment he executed his secret technique. However, for some reason the intensifying discomfort from Mok Jae-un didn't boost his fighting spirit but rather made him feel cautious. Right at that moment, Pat. Mok Jae-un, who had assumed a stance, swung his sword towards him. The first sword technique wasn't very powerful. It was utterly ordinary, but was I overthinking? If it was at this level, perhaps he had been unnecessarily cautious. Did he think he could counter the fourth-class secret technique with a stance composed of such ordinary sword techniques? Papak. Thus, the fourth class and Mok Jae-un's sword technique clashed. The momentum of the fourth class, surging like a storm as if four experts were attacking together, was truly unstoppable. I'll settle this decisively. Although the killing intent was sufficient to protect his hands and feet, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard further concentrated his martial power and transformed it into strong chi. His 2 hands and 2 feet shimmered with a blue light. Hover. Clang. It was when about 3 techniques clashed. Mok Jae-un's evil commandment sword turned black at one point. What in the world? The moment the strong chi clashed, blue sparks flew and a strong pain surged through his palms. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard inwardly questioned this. He didn't know what this black ominous energy on the sword was, but it was distorting his strong chi with each clash. However, that wasn't the only problem. Cha-cha-cha-cha-chong. The sword techniques in a single stance exceed 6? The sword techniques contained in Mok Jae-un's sword stance went beyond common sense. Instead of transitioning to the next stance, the sword techniques continued to unfold, creating trajectories that were completely unexpected. And as the trajectories increased, cha-cha-cha-cha-chong. No way. The power of the stance was rising. Clearly, at the moment of clashing with the stance, there were several flaws visible. However, as the trajectories increased, let alone flaws in the sword technique, it was difficult to find even a gap. A sword technique that grew stronger and more perfect with each clash. Just what kind of swordsmanship was this? Cha-cha-cha-cha-chong. It was the moment when the sword techniques exceeded 17. 3 of the afterimages executing the 4th class stance dispersed, and only one figure intensified. In that instant, Mok Jae-un's sword thrust towards the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's brow. His pupils trembled wildly at this. I can't block it. The sword aimed to pierce his brow without giving him a chance to react. Numerous memories flashed through the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's mind like a kaleidoscope in the face of death. Was this how he was going to die? Right at that moment, the sword, thrusting towards his brow with tremendous momentum, suddenly stopped. Just before it touched his forehead. Drip. However, as if it couldn't completely extinguish the momentum, blood flowed from a scratch on the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's brow. Gulp. As the sword stopped right before his death, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard unknowingly swallowed his saliva. Why did it stop? He couldn't understand it at all. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard finally asked, "Why did you stop?" To his question, Mok Jae-un smiled nonchalantly and replied, "I almost left a scar on your face." Scar? Yes. I thought your face needed to be as intact as possible if I were to skin it. But unfortunately, a scratch appeared. Well, I guess this much is fine. Shudder. At Mok Jae-un's words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard felt a chill run down his spine, finding it absurd. The reason he stopped the sword was to avoid leaving a scar on his face? Was he really planning to skin his face? Are you out of your mind? Swish. At that moment, the evil commandment sword's blade moved towards the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's neck. The black, ominous killing intent seemed ready to sever his neck at any moment. I said your face needs to be intact, but I never said I wouldn't kill you. So calm down. At Mok Jae-un's threat, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard was at a loss for words. It was a complete defeat. He was no match for this monstrous fellow. Even with the secret technique he had learned from his master, he couldn't possibly win against this opponent. Perhaps the outcome had been determined from the beginning. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, looking down at the evil commandment sword touching his neck, asked, "Since I'm going to die anyway, tell me." "Tell you what?" "That sword technique that broke the 4th class. What is its name?" "Ah, this sword technique?" "Yes." He wanted to know at least this one thing. Since it surpassed the secret technique his master had taught him, it must be a renowned sword technique. However, unexpected words came out of Mok Jae-un's mouth. What should I do about this?" "What do you mean? What are you saying?" "I've only created one stance so far, so I haven't named the sword technique yet." What did you say?" Upon hearing those words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's mind momentarily went blank. What did he just hear? He thought this exquisite and peerless sword technique must be a renowned and extraordinary swordsmanship. But this fellow said he had personally created it? It was even absurd. Just what kind of being had he faced? How could he claim to have created such an incredible sword technique himself? "I can't believe it. You created this peerless sword technique. Do I have a reason to lie to someone I'm about to kill?" At Mok Jae-un's words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard was rendered speechless. If what this fellow said was true, it was even more terrifying. It meant he had not only faced a monster with innate martial talent but one with the qualifications of a grand master and had been defeated. Does such a person really exist? He was genuinely astonished. To think he would face a monster capable of creating martial arts himself. The face of the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, who had been in despair and felt a sense of futility due to his defeat, gradually relaxed. He even felt somewhat fortunate. Perhaps this was the best situation a martial artist could face in death. When and how would he ever encounter such a worthy opponent? Yes, this might be for the best. In any case, his life had been manipulated by that fellow. It might not be bad to die now without causing trouble for his master. Was it because his mind was settled? The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard spoke to Mok Jae-un with a serene face. "I have no more regrets. Kill me." Ho ho. At his words, interest flashed in Mok Jae-un's eyes. He had met countless people, but he had never encountered someone who truly settled everything and accepted death in the face of it. Yet this person was genuinely accepting his death with a clear mind. He was truly a unique individual. "Hurry up and kill me." The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard spoke again. Mok Jae-un, who had been staring intently at him, opened his mouth. "It's nice that you're being clean about it, but can I ask you one thing before I kill you?" To this question, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard replied firmly. "Just because I've cleanly accepted my defeat doesn't mean I have an obligation to tell you everything about myself. So kill me." This was his last shred of dignity. And in any case, he knew what the fellow would ask. It would be something like why he, 1,000-man commander of the Imperial Palace, was a blue-eyed person from the western regions. He didn't want to argue about such things until the moment of his death. However, contrary to his expectations, completely different words came out of Mok Jae-un's mouth. "Is that so? That's quite a shame. I was curious as to why you have something like a bug in your stomach. The moment he heard those words, the eyes of the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, who had been prepared for death, widened. Just what was this fellow? Chapter 222, Mixed-Blooded 3. Just because I've cleanly accepted my defeat doesn't mean I have an obligation to tell you everything about myself. So kill me. Is that so? That's quite a shame. I was curious as to why you have something like a bug in your stomach. At Mok Jae-un's words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's eyes widened. How does he know about that? This was something even his master didn't know. How much had he been manipulated by that fellow because of this, unable to say anything even to his master? Even if he wanted to speak, he couldn't do anything because of the thing in his stomach. That was because there was a prohibition that prevented him from even mentioning it. How did he find out? Even if he wanted to tell someone about this fact, he couldn't do anything due to the prohibition. The moment he mentioned it even slightly with his own mouth, the thing in his stomach would destroy his Danjian, and on top of that, it would drive him to his death. At that moment, Mok Jae-un, who had been observing him intently, spoke. It seems I'm right. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard couldn't give any answer to Mok Jae-un's words. He didn't know if saying yes or no would be a problem, but even a slight mistake could lead to his Danjian being destroyed, so he had to be cautious. He hoped this person would dig deeper into this matter. Your expression looks like you're desperate to say something but forcibly holding back. At Mok Jae-un's words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's face brightened. It seems I'm right? He was truly a clever fellow. Although he despised showing his face to others at this moment, it seemed he needed to make the most of his expressions. Judging by his reaction, it really seems to be the case. Chong Ryong said to Mok Jae-un. Mok Jae-un nodded and replied through voice transmission. It appears so. To think there's a bug inside his body. It seems to be a real poison goo. A real poison goo? The method of creating a poison goo is extremely vicious. Dozens or hundreds of poisonous creatures are put into a jar, and the lid is not opened until only one survives. The worst one that survives is called a poison goo. When Mok Jae-un said it was a real poison goo, he meant a proper venomous insect, similar to Juso-wa, born by trapping the vengeful spirits of Corpse Blood Valley and having them devour each other, rather than a methodical issue. Of course, Chong Ryong also understood Mok Jae-un's words correctly. Then is there really a poison goo inside this Western region fellow's stomach? Yes. It's definitely there. It was clearly visible to Mok Jae-un's right eye, which had opened the power of the third eye. Of course, he hadn't realized this from the beginning. He had opened the power of the third eye to observe the breathing technique of the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's lightness skill, but he discovered another qi condensed in his stomach. A poison goo, which feeds on blood and qi within the body, was a living being, so it possessed a distinctly different qi compared to ordinary insects. Surprising. To think there was someone who could actually handle a poison goo. That's right. I've heard from grandfather and read about it in the Southern Barbarian Poison book, but this is my first time seeing one actually inside a person's body. Interest flashed in Mok Jae-un's eyes. His interest was exceptional when it came to poisons and medicinal ingredients, as he was knowledgeable about them. Especially if it was a poison he had only read about in books and had never seen in person, his interest was even greater. Should a poison goo, which is a type of poison, be considered an addiction? It can be considered an addiction. However, I've heard that a poison goo is closer to a means of restraining others rather than just serving as a poison. A means of restraint? Yes. This type of poison goo implanted inside the body doesn't come as a single one but as a pair. A pair? As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-un spoke to the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard. Even if you're under a prohibition, nodding or shaking your head won't cause a major problem, so stop making expressions. At Mok Jae-un's words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard frowned, feeling embarrassed. Paying no heed to his reaction, Mok Jae-un continued. Is it a poison goo? Ah. At that question, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard nodded with trembling eyes. He had never been able to tell anyone, but he never dreamed that someone would appear who could accurately identify the existence of this poison goo inside his body. Seeing his brightened expression, Mok Jae-un continued. It's unlikely that you would put something like this inside your body voluntarily, so someone must have forcibly inserted it, right? The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard nodded at that question. Then, regardless of your own will, you're following the orders of the one who put the poison goo inside you? The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard nodded. Mok Jung-un, who had been staring intently at him, became lost in thought for a moment and then asked, "Is it someone inside the Imperial Palace?" The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard nodded. It was like playing 20 questions, but so far there were no answers. Is it someone in a high position? The embroidered uniform guards nodded at that question. I see. Well, to be honest, I'm not particularly interested in who did it, so let's end it at this point. Rather, this question would be better. Do you want to get rid of the poison goo? At Mok Jung-un's question, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard nodded without a moment's hesitation. It went without saying that he wanted to get rid of it. Could it be that this person knew a way? He stared intently at Mok Jung-un with desperate eyes, and Mok Jung-un smiled and said, "That's good." With those words, Mok Jung-un untied the black cloth covering his face. Surprised by his sudden action, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard couldn't help but be inwardly astonished. What? Although his voice sounded somewhat young, he thought that someone with the martial prowess to create a peerless sword technique would have a certain age. However, this face didn't look like he had even reached his 20s. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard asked with an absurd expression. "You don't tell me you're not even in your 20s? No. I'll be 18 soon, but for now I'm still 17. Ha! It was unbelievable. He was only 17 years old. Was he saying that he had been overwhelmed in martial arts by such a young fellow? He was at a loss for words. As he looked at Mok Jung-un, who was younger than he expected, with bewilderment, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard suddenly had a question. Why did this fellow reveal his face? As he was puzzled, Mok Jung-un spoke. "I'll give you a choice." "A choice?" "Yes. Even if you die here, you probably won't feel particularly wronged since you've already accepted death. But should I say I'm giving you an opportunity?" "Giving me an opportunity? What on earth are you talking about?" "It's simple. If you help me with what I'm trying to do, I'll help you remove the poison goo from your body." At Mok Jung-un's words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard momentarily hesitated. This fellow was literally proposing a deal to him. He said he would help me remove the poison goo? The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's mind became complicated in an instant. He couldn't do anything, not even tell his master the truth because of the poison goo. However, if he could just remove this, the situation would change. Wasn't this the moment he had longed for? However, what if it's a lie? In the first place, this proposal itself was no different from blackmailing him by holding his weakness. Moreover, what if this fellow's words were false? Could he really remove the poison goo? That fellow said even Wata or Pyeongjak couldn't remove the poison goo. So how could this fellow eliminate it? His mind gradually filled with doubts. Mok Jung-un then spoke to him. "You're suspicious, aren't you? Do you think I can trust your words as they are? The poison goo attached inside the body isn't a single one but a pair. There's a parasitic type in the host's body and a commanding type that controls it. The parasitic type is thoroughly controlled by this commanding type, and if it tries to cause harm, it will harm the host itself. Am I wrong?" At these words, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's eyes trembled. It was too accurate to deny. It was almost the same as what that fellow had said. "Don't act rashly. I'm warning you in advance, as long as the commanding type is with the headquarters, you must faithfully follow the headquarters' orders." Nash. Just recalling it made his teeth grind. But what was this fellow's true identity? Not only did he possess monstrous martial talent befitting a Grand Master despite not even being in his 20s, but he was also quite knowledgeable about poisons? You're willing to die anyway, so it's ridiculous to hesitate when given such an opportunity. Let me help you make that choice quickly. What? Count to 5 precisely. Grip. With those words, the blade of the evil commandment sword pressed against the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's neck. With an ordinary sword, it wouldn't cut or slice unless it was drawn, but just by touching the blade it stung and blood flowed. It didn't seem like an ordinary sword. At that moment, Mok Jung-un began counting. 1. Wait a moment. 2. He had no intention of listening. Moreover, he was counting at an extremely fast pace. 3. In an instant, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard became even more conflicted. If he didn't accept this fellow's proposal, he would lose his life here. No, come to think of it, he was already in danger of dying at this fellow's hands. It was just that one more path had opened up. 4. Now there was only one number left. The blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, grasping his head that felt like it would explode, spoke to Mok Jae-eun, who was about to open his mouth. I'll do it. Swish. Thung. As soon as he finished speaking, Mok Jae-eun removed the sword from his neck and sheathed it into the scabbard. Cold sweat beaded on the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's forehead. In a brief moment, he had been consumed by countless worries as if time had stopped. However, he concluded that if he was going to die anyway, he might as well take a risk. Mok Jae-eun smiled and said to him, "It was much easier to choose, wasn't it?" "Ha. Easy." It was unbelievable. What was easy about putting his life on the line? The young fellow was more vicious than he looked. However, there was no point in arguing about it. Taking a deep breath, he asked, "So what is this task?" At this question, Mok Jae-eun approached Songa, the daughter of the Hongbong meat craftsman, who had been watching them with a confused expression. Startled by Mok Jae-eun suddenly approaching her, she asked, "Why are you doing this? Just close your ears for a moment." "Pardon." Tatatap. Mok Jae-eun quickly pressed her acupuncture points. However, she didn't particularly faint or anything. Mok Jae-eun said something to her. "Huh." The S sound. But she couldn't hear Mok Jae-eun's voice. Seeing her bewildered expression, Mok Jae-eun smiled brightly, gestured for her to wait a moment, and approached the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard, saying, "As a 1,000-men commander, you hold a senior 5th rank official position, so you must have a fairly high rank within the embroidered uniform guards, right? It's a mid-level executive position. It's not a position with decision-making authority over anything. You shouldn't try to downplay it from the start. I haven't even properly made the proposal yet." As he fell silent, Mok Jae-eun continued. "Then, let's start with the most difficult proposal first." "The most difficult?" "Yes. I'd like you to help someone escape from the underground golden jade of the Imperial Palace. Is that possible?" As soon as he finished speaking, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard's eyes widened. He had expected a troublesome proposal, but something entirely unexpected had come out. "What are you saying?" "It's exactly as you heard. I asked if you could bring out the person I want from the underground golden jade of the Imperial Palace." Mok Jae-eun smirked at him. Come to think of it, there might be no need for him to go in personally. If he could manipulate a embroidered uniform guards of the 1,000-men commander rank, which was a senior 5th rank position, wouldn't it suffice to have him go in and bring the person out? Not a bad idea. Chong Ryong also agreed with Mok Jae-eun's thought. If there were other options, there was no need to take unnecessary risks. However, regardless of being accused of treason or whatnot, I cannot fulfill that request. You can't fulfill it? I don't know exactly who you're trying to help escape, but even as an embroidered uniform guard, we don't handle all affairs within the Imperial Palace. What do you mean by that? The embroidered uniform guards is divided into 6 departments, and the tasks vary accordingly. 6 departments? Then what is your task? I belong to the investigation department as part of the military selections department. If someone like me interferes or meddles in the affairs of other departments, I'll be arrested for overstepping my authority. That's quite a troublesome rule. Mok Jae-eun scratched his head. He thought it would be possible with an embroidered uniform guard of the 1,000-men commander rank, but it wasn't going to be resolved easily. Mok Jae-eun then said, "Then can't you do it secretly even if it means overstepping your authority?" At this question, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard let out a hollow laugh and said, "Does the Imperial Palace seem that lax to you? Not only are there experts from the embroidered uniform guards but also from the Eastern Depot and Western Depot. The underground Golden Jade of the Imperial Palace is guarded by the Golden Jade horse troops in addition to the embroidered uniform guards. It's virtually impossible for me alone to secretly infiltrate such a place and help someone escape. It was quite complicated. Come to think of it, if this could be easily resolved, they would have taken the approach of bribing someone from the embroidered uniform guards in charge of managing the Golden Jade to help with the escape in the first place." He considered forcing the issue by holding his life as collateral, but if a situation arose where the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard failed the task, it would become even more difficult to carry out the escape. In that case his usefulness would be diminished. Mok Jae-un shrugged his shoulders and said. Then there's no other way. It's of no help to me at all. If you really intend to enter the underground golden jade of the Imperial Palace, there is one method. Before Mok Jae-un could finish his sentence, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard spoke. Mok Jae-un asked with a puzzled expression. What's the other method? Entering through the guard trials. Mok Jae-un showed no particular reaction to his words. That was because it was already part of their plan. Their primary objective was to infiltrate the underground golden jade by becoming a embroidered uniform guards through the guard trials. That's already. After completing the guard trials, there's a month-long embroidered uniform guards apprenticeship for the final selection. An embroidered uniform guard apprenticeship? This was the first time he heard about it. Their plan was to carry it out in a completely different way. That's why noble imperial concubine Sio's help was crucial. At that moment, the blue-eyed embroidered uniform guard answered Mok Jae-un's question. It's a new addition based on the commander's opinion. The selected recruits will apprentice at each department of the 6 departments on a 5-day rotation for a month. So it's to gain experience beforehand? Something like that. Here, the 4 departments which manages the Golden Jade will also have an apprenticeship. Oh, is that so? Then there will be an opportunity to enter the Golden Jade. No. That's not the case. What do you mean? The underground golden jade of the Imperial Palace has mechanical traps, and its structure is highly complex and dangerous. Only trained embroidered uniform guards who have memorized the entire golden jade battle map can enter. Therefore, as far as I know, the plan is to have the apprentices only manage the general golden jade in the outer city. At his words, Mok Jae-un tilted his head and said, that means the information you've provided won't be of much help. Listen until the end. Originally, that's how it was supposed to proceed, but there's still a short period left until the trials. Within that time, I can help by slightly changing the regulations. Slightly changing the regulations? What do you mean? I'll try to make it so that the embroidered uniform guards apprentices can also be deployed to the underground golden jade.